5 student suicides in 2 weeks. That's the only headline we should be talking about. In the last fortnight, Tamil Nadu lost 5 students to suicide. Young students, all of 17, with their entire lives ahead of them, resorting to extreme measures. While investigators are looking into each case separately, the deaths have raised the alarm and begs the question, is there a lack of mental health infrastructure and support systems for young, impressionable students, especially post the pandemic? Is there a pattern here? According to statistics, 12,526 Indian students committed suicide in 2020. 8.2% of suicide victims in India in 2020 were students. Why is this not being recognized as a grave crisis? What do we need to do? Where do we need to start? On We the People, we believe this is an important conversation, and we've curated a panel that has worked and invested in this issue. Joining us tonight on We the People, Dr. Amit Sen, child and adolescent psychiatrist, Dr. Saranya T. Jayakumar, member of the Commission for Protection of Child Rights in the Government of Tamil Nadu, also an educational psychologist, Anubha Srivastav, president of the India-wide Parents Association, also a lawyer, Mansoor Ali Khan, general secretary of the management of independent CBSE schools, the Association of Karnataka, and we have Aparna Piramal Raja, author of Chemical Khichdi. Dr. Jayakumar, I want to start with you. You know, while Tamil Nadu is in the hot seat right now, the reality is, like I just said, that 8.2% of suicide victims in 2020 in India were students. Over 12,000 students have committed suicide. There are statistics that say one student commits suicide every hour. What is going on here, doctor?
Yeah, I feel there is a lot of stress that children have these days, especially adolescents. Psychology says the adolescent age group, 14 to 18 years old, is the most stressed. Academic distress, especially post-pandemic, when they have lost in touch with continual education. A child that was in 7th standard before pandemic is now in class 10, and they're going to face board exams. They've missed almost 60% of syllabus of class 8 and 9, and they were all made to pass because we understand it was pandemic. And now they're going to face the board exams. You see the amount of pressure that is there on the child, the amount of expectations mounting on them from family, from school. School is pushing them to score marks. Families are expecting them to be IAS officers, doctors, what not. And the child has enough distractions already. And also these small little relationship issues and, fight between friends. All these things also pile up together, and children tend to, get into such wrong decisions. In Tamil Nadu, specifically in the last 15 days, almost close to 12 cases of children attempting suicides. 5 passed away. The remaining, they are alive, but they are not okay, because they've jumped off buildings, they've consumed poison, whatnot. So I feel there is a huge gap in, as you said, the infrastructure required for mental health. Schools need counseling psychologists. It's just the need of the moment now.
They are not okay. I think that we are not okay. I think that is something we all need to acknowledge. Dr. Amit Sen, do we then need to destigmatize mental health issues? What is it that we need to do first? It sounds like, from what Dr. Jayakumar is saying over here, stress levels have gone up over the past 2 decades, perhaps, for everyone, but we're focusing on students specifically. First, do we need to destigmatize the issue of mental health issues?
Oh, absolutely. I think that professionals like us have been shouting about this for decades, literally. And we have actually seen this graph of mental health problems, difficulties in children, adolescents rising exponentially over the years. Even before the pandemic hit us, there were very robust research studies which told us that between the age of 10 to 24, as many as 60,000 or more young people commit suicide in India. More than 60,000, 63,000 was the official figure in 2013. And it is indeed the #1 killer in young people, more than road traffic accidents or any other illness. That's the kind of magnitude that we are dealing with here. The mental illness and how it has grown has also been captured by WHO studies, across the world, including India, and they have shown that by the time it was October, November 2020, after the pandemic, there was a 4 to 5-fold increase in symptoms of depression, anxiety, suicidal behaviors, and substance misuse. That's the kind of increase that we have seen in these last couple of years during the pandemic, and there has been no redressal to that. So, right from awareness building, sensitization, addressing the stigma, having systems in place right across the board, from schools to homes to NGOs, and of course the government mechanism, there has to be an acknowledgement of how deep this crisis is. As I was saying, that India is said to be the suicide capital, particularly in the young, and the maximum suicides that you see are from the age of 10 to 24.
So, all right, I have audience members trying to come in. They're just gesticulating that they have to say something to say. Prabjot joins us. What did you have to say, Prabjot?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I have a question that is, according to you, is mental health responsible for student suicide, and does our education system give attention to mental health issues?
Does our education system give attention to mental health issues? Let's talk about the education system first. We have Dr. Jaikumar, who had mentioned that, failure, children fail, a fear of failure, and there's so much pressure on them. Parents are pressurizing them. But Dr. Sen, let me ask you first, is failure the cause that leads one to commit suicide? And I ask this because, the Cuddalore student I read, she was a school topper in English. She scored some 93% in class 11. Her mother, I read, painfully somewhere, said that she always thought their family was supportive, as was the school. She said in an interview somewhere that the teachers were always praising this child, that she was already studying for her upcoming test. So is it, I'm trying to understand as a parent also. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like for this mom right now.
So, in the way we see it, it's a failure in an exam, or a breakup in a relationship, or a crisis at home. Let's say, somebody passing away, a big loss can be a precipitant, but it cannot be the only cause that leads up to suicide. Usually, it's a culmination of many things that come together, and at least 2/3, or perhaps 75% of people who eventually commit suicide, including adolescents, would have suffered from a mental illness before that. And the large majority of them suffer from depression. Again, the fact is that none of us are able to pick it up in this journey that these young people make through the stress, the social media, the academic pressure, expectations from the family. All of that comes together, and when there is a crisis like this, a failure in an exam or a breakup in a relationship, that precipitates the crisis, and that's when the act or the attempt takes place. But we have to understand the whole phenomena in a much more layered and in a deeper way, so that we can address it at different stages. We can't just be looking at the time that the crisis has already occurred. Sometimes that's too late, isn't it? Yeah. So we have to begin to understand what goes on before a young person eventually wants to take this extreme, drastic step.
Many layers to this. I think that's very important what you've just talked about. There'll always be a trigger, but there is always a variety of factors behind it perhaps at play. Let's bring in Aparna Piramal Raje, the author of Chemical Khichdi. Aparna, thank you for joining us. You've come out publicly, you've written a book that talks about your own struggles with mental health. And I want to ask you first, when I think about this Cuddalore student, if one looked at you, I've looked at your resume and it's so impressive. Former CEO of VP Ergo, an MBA from Harvard Business School, you've read economics and politics and philosophy at Oxford University, and yet at the same time you've come out to write a book that says that you've struggled with the issue of mental health and depression.
Yeah, I mean, when I was hearing you describe the story of the student earlier, I said, what parallels, because I also had a good academic track record, But at the same time, there was a time in my life when I was standing on the terrace of my building wondering if it was high enough for me to jump out from, and there was no reason for me to be making that kind of statement because I had a very supportive family. I had 2 young children. And I was still feeling that, that I wasn't good enough from inside. So that sense of failure and not having the kind of success that I wanted myself to have, despite from the outside having everything that somebody might think would be considered a success, it wasn't enough for me. I didn't feel good enough. So I think that, it's very hard to actually know what's going inside somebody's mind. And nobody certainly in my family knew that I was having these thoughts and that I was thinking in that direction at all.
So, Aparna, explain then to me, because, every time we have a student suicide, the teacher scolded this child and the teacher arrested and put away, or father didn't give a phone to the child. There's always something like this. If we keep looking at the trigger, calling it an individual personal matter, are we then sweeping the issue under the carpet, allowing society to escape our collective responsibility? Because we had Dr. Sen talking about, that it being layered, multidimensional, it's a public mental health issue, it's complex, he's saying it's an intersectoral problem. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I very much agree with the doctor, because I think that to look at mental health as something that is disconnected from society is really a fallacy. I think that mental health operates at many levels. It's about the individual, it's about their relationships, the family, the society, community, the systems in which we operate. So I think it's everything from, the education system that we just talked about, to perhaps they are facing marginalization and discrimination, to not having access to the healthcare that they need. For example, just this, we don't have a culture of therapy and seeking counseling, as we've also mentioned. So I think one should look at mental health really as a combination of all these issues, and not something that is linked to a particular individual's personality or a particular incident, or even to, I would say, a particular disorder or a mental health illness. I think it's a combination of factors which are all contributing to as triggers.
So very worrying, as Dr. Sen says, India accounts for 20% of global suicides. Do we have policies to address this on the scale that's required? Do we even know the full picture? I mean, if we can't acknowledge there's a problem, then how do we even fix it? And do we have the wherewithal to even fix it? I mean, let's bring in, we have another audience member, Radhika. Has a comment. Go ahead, Radhika.
So we've been watching that that failure has been only the reason why students commit suicide. Do you think it is the only reason?
Do you think failure is the only reason? No, I think Dr. Sen has just touched upon that. But let me bring in what one of the other audience members had talked about, which was the education system. What's the role of the education system? We have Mansoor Ali Khan. Mansoor Ali Khan, we link farmer suicides in India to the agrarian crisis. Then similarly, aren't student suicides a reflection of the education system overall per se?
Yeah, definitely. This is the present setup, what we've got, and so many suicides with the young adolescents and youth. There is a problem with the system. See, and this problem can be sorted out there. It's a major national issue. You need the central government, the state governments, the educators, the counselors, parents, teachers. Everybody has to contribute collectively for this issue to be sorted out. And as an educator, I have always felt in India, the pressure is so much as either it is perform or perish. And we don't celebrate effort, we celebrate marks. And that has to change. And for example, most of our schooling system is dependent on the exam, the type of it's exam-centric education.
Yeah.
And again, there's so many pressures. Then again, if you see, you go back with the urban setup and the rural setup schools. In the urban setup, the challenges are very different, where the adolescents and youngsters are committing suicide. Again, when you go to the rural setup, there are other issues like discrimination, which lead to low self-esteem. And low self-esteem leads to mental health. And that has become a real problem. So this is a very, very large issue where it has to be along with the educators, counselors, special educators, the governments, the entire society has to be involved in this. And I've also felt like if, that's my personal observation, earlier we used to have a joint family system where now the families have become nuclear families, where earlier they may have been a social outlet for the child. So there's a lot of changing scenario. And again, urban India has a very different sort of challenges, and the rural India has a very different sort of challenges in schools and colleges.
But overall, I think it'll be fair to say that it's not the child, obviously, who's at blame. But ironically, these students blame themselves for not perhaps getting that dream job. But the fault really lies with our governments and our education institutions. We don't even give them practical vocational skills. You can't apply the education for which they compete so hard with each other, spend their parents' money, and then they find that, you know, the education can't be applied to their lived realities. But let's bring in the issue of parents. I think it was Dr. Saranya who mentioned pressure of parents. Anubha Srivastav, speak for the parents here, because we put the blame often at the door of the parents, right? That they're pressurizing their kids. But honestly, no parent really wants to harm their own child, right? Like, and my heart really goes out to that mom in Cuddalore who's going to have to live with that question. What did she do wrong? What could she have done differently? And she'll have to struggle with that for the rest of her life. So, Anubha Srivastav, what are we parents doing wrong, and do we not know what we need to do to help ourselves, our kids? Because I know for a fact that no parent intends to do this to their kids.
Agree. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for this wonderful show. Actually, this is a need of the hour, and we are actually heading towards mental health pandemic. As I have already said, after COVID, this issue has increased a lot. As far as parents are concerned, I would tell you many parents are not aware only that what kind of mental stress their child is going through, because many times in our country it is like a taboo. If you're having any kind of anxiety or depression, students and even adults, they don't want to come forward and discuss that we are having some mental problem, because then they will be told to visit the psychiatrist or the psychologist. So in our country, definitely it's a taboo. That's why many people don't speak up. Even parents are not aware that their child is going through some kind of mental problem. Many children, they don't discuss with their parents. So parents are not aware. Maybe some might be aware, few might be aware, but many parents are not aware that the child is going through some kind of mental stress. Because recently, in past few months and last 2 years also, we have seen so many children have committed suicide. NEET aspirants, 12th board students, and many students, even MBBS graduates and those who are pursuing MBBS and other courses, they are also committing suicide. Parents are not aware what the child is going through. So we need a lot of awareness among parents as well as children, as a society, as one of the panelists said.
So you mentioned awareness, you talked about this being a taboo. So let me ask Aparna Piramal Raje, why did you choose to come out in the open, out of the closet? I'm not sure what the word is. Why did you choose to do this? Because you've said you have a supportive family, you could have continued, this could have been a private matter. Why go public with this?
Because I think everybody needs to talk about it. And frankly, it was normalized in my head, you know, in the sense that I don't see this as a taboo subject in my head at all. Like, this is part of what I live with. I'm bipolar. I live with it. And I think it's a very important subject that everyone needs to talk about. So that was really the main reason. And I thought I had arrived at some insights in my journey of living with this for 20 years that would be helpful to other people. And that's why I wrote the book. So.
All right. So then, Dr. Sen.
Yeah. Can I just add, you know, I think that's so important, what you just said about needing to talk and to create spaces where you feel safe to talk about your inner world. I think that's a thing that we lack in our society, because it's very, for instance, I mean, I don't think that any one group is responsible for suicide in students now. I mean, I'm sure everybody, all of us contribute in some way, and we need to take a collective responsibility. Particularly parents, it's very hard for them to face up to this reality that their child might be depressed, and even more so, they might want to actually kill themselves. It's one of the hardest things to hear. And that's why most of the time when children and young people actually come up with statements like that, the response is often very callous to insensitive. Many times they would say, why do you have to feel like that? You have everything in your life. Just pull up your socks. You just have to be brave. Or something like, what's this drama about? We've had enough of your excuses. And when young people who are already going through mental health problems do not find the space to talk about it, their other option is then to begin to harm themselves and see no way out. And those are kind of spaces that we need to create, not just in homes, but in schools, in the larger community, so that we can talk, discuss, and actually acknowledge. It's a hard thing to acknowledge, but we have to acknowledge it first to be able to find solutions to it.
Absolutely. Dr. Saranya Jaikumar, then could you come in here? You're an educational psychologist. What are the, for parents who are watching, and Dr. Sen touched upon this, how do we know that perhaps, what are the signs that our child could emit, or what are the statements, what kind of things could they say that should be setting off alarm bells in our minds?
Okay, the one thing that we have to notice, if the child is starting to socially isolate, that is a very, very important sign you have to look for. A very happy child, speaking well with others, suddenly becomes very silent, very calm, not wanting to talk much, things like that. See, I must say to all parents who are watching this show, they must understand children do not need your advice today. Children are so sensitive, they react instantly to advice. See, parents are advising, teacher is advising, tutors in their tuition classes and other classes are advising, relatives are advising, but there is nobody to listen to this child. As Mr. Sen very rightly said, if I am an adolescent, I want to go and speak somewhere about what is running in my head. See, I might think everything all wrong, okay, for my age, but I want a place to go and talk this completely, open up completely. There is no such place for most children in this country. Can they go and discuss about relationship problems with parents? No. Can they go and discuss about, I'm not interested to study this subject with a teacher? No. Everybody is judgmental with a child. Everybody jumps in to start to give their advice. What we need is people who can listen to children. So when you have children at home, please be good listeners. Don't immediately start giving advice. Just listen to them. Just say, and keep listening. After 30, 45 minutes, they will open up something, and then you can, start giving your little suggestions slowly. Immediately when a child sits to speak and says, this is my problem, immediately starting to give advice is a wrong thing to do. And second thing, if there is a child who is always liking music or sports and suddenly losing interest in that, that's a sign you need to watch for, because that is a sign of depression. A child that nicely dresses up all the time does not like to dress up is a sign. Child always locking up in the room, child not eating properly, child suddenly not interested in education at all, not wanting to go to school at all. Even when friends come home to meet, this child will not want to meet the friends. Even if best friend is calling, will not attend the call. So these are signs a parent should not miss. These are little red flags that every parent must watch for.
What do you do, Dr. Sen, if parents aren't even around at home that much anymore? Everybody has their own, you're at work where it takes you 2 hours to get home. The fathers are absent. We can't, their jobs are taking you away, keeping you away from home from 10 to 9, and kids have to go to bed by then. It's almost depressing. What is the way out?
Of course, our society has changed dramatically, as Dr. Mansoor was saying, that we used to have a joint family. We had many more support systems. Our communities, even within colonies, were much more robust, and people would look after each other. And we have lost that sense of community. And indeed, you're right that perhaps there is no parent out there to look after or even see the changes that are coming about in the moods and the behaviors of their children. And that's why I think, again, it needs a very kind of proactive mindset to be able to put the safety nets in place. So even if the parents are not there, is there a older sibling? Is there a grandparent? Could there be some other friends who you remain connected with? So, when children go through stressful times, and again, this all boils down to how much awareness we have about this as parents, as the whole community, we need to stretch ourselves to be able to provide those safety nets which will actually address some of these crises that come up from time to time. And again, I can't agree with Dr. Jaikumar more than this space to be listened. I mean, children need to be listened to, not just through your ears, but through your eyes, heart, and whole being, without any comments, without coming up with immediate solutions. And those are spaces that we have to create. And it's a collective effort. If parents are not there, they could be school, they could be a mentor somewhere out there in the community. There could be so many different people. And those are the things that we have to think about creatively and together as a collective. We have to keep our children safe. We have to create spaces for them to talk. We have to listen to them. And I mean, foremost, I think that we have to create what are called emotionally safe spaces, so that we can actually, hold them. We can support them through times of crisis. There will be crises. There will be stress. There will be exams. There will be breakups in relationships. All those are realities of life. And the pandemic has actually, given another spin to this. It has made sort of simple things in life full of crises and absolute chaos, isn't it? So this is a time to, I think, relook at what our priorities are. What does education stand for? What does success stand for? What do we stand for in our society in terms of value and looking after our children? Big questions, and we have to ask them now. If we don't ask them now, I don't know when we will.
Absolutely, these statistics are
could
very
I just
worrying.
Make one comment, sorry? Could I just make one comment to add to that? Like, one of the things I always say, and I've said in my book also, is that mental health is a team sport. You think that it's something that can be just done by one person because one person is going through, but it affects everyone. It affects the entire family. It affects the workplace, the school, everyone. So it really is a team sport, and everyone can play a role into helping a person or a family with that.
And we all have a role to play. If a child is committing suicide every hour, we're all responsible one way or the other in our jobs, in our professions, me as a journalist, the media, how we cover this. Thank you all for joining us. We feel that this was a crucial issue that we must touch upon. This whole week is a bit about sports and politics, as Bollywood, as is often the case in India, and a crucial issue like this we felt needed coverage. Thank you for joining us on We the People, where we believe it's important to speak up, but it's also important to listen, especially so in this case. Thank you all.